Good morning, everybody. It's Wednesday morning, March 24th, and this is the Senate Agricultural Committee. We're going to get started on a proposal this morning dealing with hemp and cannabis. And we have Michelle Childs with us, our legislative draftsperson. Good morning, Michelle.
Good morning.
And Kevin Ellis and Pedro Lynn and all the committee members. And I think we've all met a week or so ago. And so I'll skip by the introductions of everyone and we'll get right to the draft that Michelle, would you like to run through that draft that you sent us? And
sure.
We'll go from
okay,
there.
Okay to share my screen with y'all?
Pardon?
Are you guys okay with me sharing the screen? Some chairs don't like it because you can't see everybody. Is this okay?
Sure, as long as you don't take any more than that.
Okay.
No, go ahead, Michelle.
Okay, so great. So what I have here is an amendment for discussion that addresses the issue of cannabis establishments and dispensaries being able to purchase and process hemp under their cannabis establishment license or their dispensary license. So I know I don't have to give you all the backstory. You know that all the hemp stuff is completely separate from the cannabis regulation. So hemp is controlled by a chapter in Title 6 and the cannabis in Title 7. A completely separate process for licensing that we're in the midst of setting up. And so the first licenses are supposed to be issued next spring. And then the witnesses had brought an issue to you around concern whether or not if someone is licensed under the new cannabis system, could they purchase hemp products for processing and inclusion in any cannabis products that they might be either manufacturing or selling. And so I know the witnesses had suggested an amendment in the cannabis chapters that would change the definition of cannabis. Right now, the definition of cannabis excludes hemp, and they were looking for to kind of build on that exception and say, well, it doesn't include hemp except under certain conditions. And I have a reluctance to changing the definition of cannabis to include hemp because we've gone to great lengths to date to kind of keep them clearly separate and make sure that we're not jeopardizing anything in terms of our hemp program, our hemp pilot program. And so I talked it over with Grady because he's the expert on hemp. And so I think we decided that the best approach to address this would be just to make an amendment within the cannabis chapter, specifically authorizing those licensees to be able to handle hemp. And so you have so what I drafted it as a potential amendment to S25 because that is on the floor this week, but I just wasn't sure where it might go. So I just drafted it as an amendment, individual amendment. There's two sections. The first section, section 20. Starting on line 6, this is just adding an exception there because there is already something in current law that says clearly that the cannabis chapters don't apply to the regulation of hemp. So I just did a little carve out there on line 9. And then you have a new section on section 21. And so this is adding section 870 to Title 7. And this is within the cannabis establishment chapter, to say that hemp flower and biomass may be purchased and extracted by a cannabis establishment licensed pursuant to this chapter. And so those are the adult use licensees. And then, or a dispensary license pursuant to chapter 37. So the dispensaries are currently regulated in Title 18 Chapter 86, and they're regulated by the Department of Public Safety. But one thing that's happening is that they're to move over to the Cannabis Control Board from DPS. Last year in Act 164, they had them moving over in March, but S25 moves them over earlier, moves them over July 1st. They will continue to operate under the Title 18 provisions till they switch over in March. So that doesn't change. But under the current scheme, under Title 18, dispensaries can purchase hemp and handle hemp under their existing statutory scheme. And so this is just that when the new one drops down in March, they would be able to do it similarly. And so they can purchase and extract the flower and biomass as long as it was obtained from a hemp grower that's registered under our current program, or if they are registered or licensed in a state authorized to produce and sell hemp under federal law. And so my understanding when talking with Mike was that that's possible currently under our existing scheme for the hemp.
And that, and what about the testing, Michelle? Is there have you built in regulations of the testing to make sure that we aren't running over any limits, for THC or any of that?
Well, the thing here is that when you're talking about, we're talking just regulating here the cannabis establishment. So they're already authorized.
Okay.
Mike and I are trying to silo it, right? So it's like, it's not changing anything with regard to who is registered under Title VI to grow hemp. This is just saying that if you are licensed under the new cannabis law, you can also you can also work with hemp. And so, I think it's permissible under the current law, but the witnesses would like some better clarity about that rather than leaving it up to the board. There is a provision in current law that requires the board to adopt rules regarding additives to cannabis products. There's not much discussion of hemp in the existing cannabis laws other than if you're a retailer that's going to be selling cannabis products and you also sell hemp products, you're supposed to clearly label those as such in your retail store, so that consumers aren't confused about which product and you have to kind of keep them separate. But that's really all that's addressed currently with regard to the hemp. So I think it's permissible under current law, but the witnesses, and they can speak for themselves, but I think they're looking for clarity on this at this point through legislation.
So it's really, this is clarifying the law to make it very clear that it is an allowable use.
Yes. Yep. But it's not changing anything with regard to your hemp program. Again, we didn't want to mess with that or jeopardize that by injecting the cannabis issue into the hemp program.
Or it's not changing the cannabis regs either, right? Only it's clarifying the language that you can use hemp as an additive to cannabis.
Yes, it's specifically authorizing that. It's silent on the matter in the current law, but has the board adopting rules with respect to additives. So it's totally permissible for it under the current scheme, but I guess there is the possibility that the board could put forth something and say they don't, that a cannabis establishment couldn't be working with hemp. But I mean, I think that would be arguably tough for them to put forward because there are some specific do not combine cannabis with certain ingredients under the cannabis license scheme. So there's a specific prohibition against combining cannabis and alcohol or cannabis and nicotine. And that's in statute. So I think if the board was going to interpret it that they could say you can't combine it with hemp, I think there's a strong argument to say, well, we would have said that in the legislation. But there's no harm in articulating this specifically in statute. I'm just saying that if you didn't, I personally don't have a lot of concern. It wouldn't be addressed by the board, but I understand the industry, wants more certainty about that.
Yeah.
So page 2, subsection B, is that the cannabis establishments and dispensaries can obtain and process the hemp in the form of distillate or isolate, and all processed hemp derivatives shall be accompanied by a certificate of analysis showing potency levels for all those chemical compounds that I can't pronounce. And that's modeled after Illinois. And subsection C is just kind of a cross-reference about the provision I spoke about the adoption of rules with regard to additives. And that's it. So it's pretty straightforward. I'm hopeful that Pietro and Kevin might think that this will address their concerns if you're interested in moving forward.
Yeah. And are there any questions from committee members of Michelle at this point?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. Michelle, I'm trying to get my head around this because I heard you say that this is sort of already handled, and I, there's a lot of investment and energy that's gone into the hemp and the CBD business world today in Vermont for the last several years. There's a lot of sort of pent up energy to go into the cannabis THC world, and this explicit blending of them. I can't give you a good reason, but it does make me a little bit uneasy because I don't pretend I understand all of the ramifications, and I'm not convinced there's a rush. But I want to just explore. You sort of said, I don't think this is necessary. And that's kind of my assumption. I mean, if somebody is growing or processing under the cannabis scheme, there's no part of the state that is checking up on what kind of cannabis plant you have, right? So cannabis producer could grow some CBD cannabis. Nobody cares about that, right? I mean, help me understand. I get that maybe it's a little not clear, but is there a what problem are we really aiming at? And the reason I ask is every time we talk about this on the floor and bring floor amendments, especially, there's an unease. And I got to be convinced that it's really worth it before we take that on, because everything was just complicated. So, Michelle, can you help me understand? You sort of said, I'm not sure this is necessary. Everybody wouldn't mind a little extra clarity, maybe. But what do you think, Michelle, this clarity brings? Does it make a real change? Or is it just simply a little belts and suspenders?
I think that what the witnesses are looking to do, I think, is totally permissible under the existing statutory scheme, and the way that I view how this would be working with the board and the adoption of rules. I would anticipate that this is all going to be a part of that, and it would be a board decision. But if you want to be absolutely sure that it's clear to the board that a cannabis establishment or dispensary can be handling hemp separate and apart, but do it under their, but it's not any kind of violation of their license under Title VII, it's fine to certainly, be very direct in that and include that in there. So, this was not a discussion as part of Act 164 last biennium around these two. And as you know, because you're always dealing with Mike and in your committee on the hemp issue, they very, very separate issues intentionally. So, we're probably going to see, obviously, as the industry grows, more and more of a blending of the two, right? So people who are currently growing hemp are probably, many of them are interested in converting to cannabis and obtaining a cannabis license. And maybe they would want to be registered under the hemp program and have a cannabis establishment license. But, I don't know, that would be a question for Mike about whether or not that would jeopardize something under the hemp program. That's where the real, I think, concern is. But this is just talking about cannabis establishments having hemp. So
yeah. See, this is, and again, nobody is nailing this, but this is my concern, that there clearly are people in the hemp world that are warming up to get into the cannabis world. That is, everybody understands that. But there are also people in the hemp world that are happy in the hemp world and don't have any desire, I believe, to go into cannabis. And I'm a little bit worried that this shift may be undermining those people, without us fully understanding it. So to the extent I'm expressing hesitancy, that's part of it. But anyway, thank you.
Brian?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Senator Pearson's question prompted me to think about this as well. And I'm probably not going to say this the right way, but this seems like a one-way street to me. In other words, if you are already having a cannabis license, you're asking for an additional ability to grow hemp, but those who only have a hemp license are going to get that same sort of flexibility in their world. And I'm wondering, how many people are we talking about that need both licenses, if you will?
But is there something in the law that says you can't have both licenses? I don't think there isn't anything in this bill or this draft that would prohibit going either way. I can't see. Maybe I'm missing it, but
there isn't. I guess the question I would have, and it would be for Mike, unfortunately, I'm sorry I can't answer it, but is about, the practical implications if you had someone who was growing both. Is that a concern in terms of the hemp program because of the federal rules around that and what's required to be a part of that project? I don't think that anything in amendment or in the statutory scheme jeopardizes that. And so that's one of the things we wanted to be very clear about, is we didn't want to mess with the hemp statutes because they're created in a way to make sure that you're in compliance with federal law. And so, but I don't know the answer to the question if somebody was growing hemp and then decided to apply for a cultivation license and then they were doing both, what their liability is with regard to the hemp and the federal program.
Hydra, did you have a question? I see a hand go up.
You did, and I was hoping if the committee would allow it, or you, Mr. Chairman, would allow it, that I would be permitted to speak to the issue that Michelle rightly raised. And so look, the concern here, and I think again, remember, I'm a lawyer and I work with courts in terms of statutory construction and application. And this is my fear. If we were adding vitamin C to cannabis, it would be an additive. And we wouldn't need to worry about any changes to the current statutory scheme. It's fine. What is different here is we are changing the nature of the CBD oil through the process in turning it into, as part of this combination with cannabis, into THC. And so quite literally, a court could easily conclude that is not an additive. That is a transformation of the CBD oil into something else. And so the distinction for me is if we were just putting CBD oil into a cannabis product and say, look, CBD oil is healthy for you, so when you use the cannabis, you get these other health benefits, that would be one thing. But what we are proposing and the technology that exists allow us to use cannabis and CBD oil in combination and turn it into relatively pure THC. That's the gap that we're concerned about. And now let me transition for a moment to Michelle's draft, which I thought was excellent. And I think it does two things. It creates certainty around processing the CBD oil into THC, and then puts it under the umbrella of the cannabis statutory scheme and the cannabis board. And I think that's all for the positive. But it does something else that I'm not sure I had considered. What it does is it expands the marketplace for hemp farmers because it grants an ability to process the hemp into THC, first making isolate or distillate, and then later into THC. So hemp farmers in Vermont have a broader marketplace for their product. So that was, Chairman Starr, that's what I wanted to raise.
Yeah. So, Chris, do you have an issue with timing? Because that bill, that bill's up this week, and today's Wednesday, so I don't know if it's tomorrow. I think that bill comes up.
Today, it's today, and
it's today.
So yeah, I mean so I mean I'm not enthusiastic. I can't articulate myself well because I'm not understanding this, and I guess if it were left to me, I would encourage our friends here to work on this on the second half. This bill goes, is only just getting started in our process. Yeah. So, but I'm not gonna throw down over this if the committee's interested. I'm just be honest and say I'm not understanding all the ramifications. This is a brand new industry. I think, frankly, it's why we set up a board to handle some of these more nuanced considerations. And I'm not sure of the harm if this gets sorted out in year 2 of our markets. I mean, you talk over the years, we talk about having a mature market, and it will take many years. You don't even see that in Massachusetts and other states that have been 4 or 5 years under a tax and regulate scheme. So I'm not seeing the urgency, and I'm a little uncomfortable acting quick, but that's just me. If committee.
Well, this is a Senate bill, right? And so it's got to go to the House. Kevin, have you talked with any House members at all to see, what their feeling is? Like, I don't know if this should be, we haven't dealt with cannabis really hardly at all, but we've dealt with the hemp. So I'm wondering, have you talked with, so I would expect this bill will go to judiciary on the House side. And I really haven't talked with any of them to see if they would take this proposal that we could, I think we could send them a letter or whatever asking if they would please consider this because of its timeliness coming to us kind of late. But, it all makes sense to me. About being able to combine the products without having a lot of problems with the regulators and clarifying the language so you could do that. But this is only the second day, I guess, that we've really worked on this. What do you think about something like that, Kevin, politically working?
Mr. Chairman, I think that's great. I don't want to put the Senator Pearson in a difficult position, and I see.
Why not? He gets a big bucks.
And we're a letter to the House Judiciary would be great. Our goal here was to get this issue on the table so it could be discussed. And we're happy to go over to the House Judiciary Committee and introduce the issue with a little more deliberation, and see what happens. I think that works fine. And I'm grateful to Michelle for putting her head on this and putting pen to paper. So,
well, and it
progress.
would also give us an opportunity to talk with Senator Sears in our Judiciary Committee, asking them, to think about this. And Michelle, of course, is in there probably about every day. And it would give our whole side more opportunity to get used to this, and if we could support it over on the other side to some degree, I'm sure we could talk with Carolyn in the Ag Committee about where we are, on this. We're late getting started, but would ask that they would consider it, and Senator Sears, if we can get him to buy into this, he could talk with the House Judiciary Committee as well.
Yeah, it was Senator Sears that sent us over to you because he was busy with racial equity and a lot of other issues. So that's what led us to you. And I'd love to get some advice about whether we should go talk to House Judiciary or House Ag first. We'll do both, whatever you want.
Well,
it's actually not House, it's House Government Operations. So Judiciary, now that cannabis in Title VII, Judiciary doesn't work on it all in the House. And
Okay.
I think that's probably going to shift over in the Senate as well to be GovOps, because they're still with the criminal and civil violation, cannabis stuff. And so now that it's really just regulating an industry and setting up the agency, it's the GovOps committee. So it would be Representative Copeland-Hansis, and then if you wanted Ag, to take a look at it, decide and make a recommendation to House Government Operations on the issue.
We'll do.
Yeah. So what's the committee agreeable with that we would, punt this over to the House, to me, it sounds like it's clarifying language. And if it would allow our hemp guys one more sales outlet, their sales haven't been, to this point, haven't been that great. If it would allow an additional market for them, I think it would be good. I don't think cannabis growers are going to want to grow hemp unless they've got plots of land lots of miles apart because of cross-pollination and stuff. I think they'd probably just as soon let the hemp farmers grow the hemp and buy what they want to buy from them, rather than fooling around growing hemp and growing cannabis. Brian?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm fully in support of your suggestion that we allow the other body to consider this.
Yeah. And you guys are okay, I guess, Kevin. I think you've got a pretty good crew to work with there in government ops on the other side. So that should move along, and Michelle's already done the heavy lifting. So that's good. So that's what we will do, and wish you well, and hopefully we can get this done for you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the committee.
Thank you,
Yeah.
everybody. Have a great day.
Yeah, and thank you. So, Linda, what do we got up next?
At 10 o'clock, Michael's going to come in and walk you through H434.
So we haven't got anything until 10. What about our bills that we've got 100 coming up today, and
Both of them. And 102.
102. So is Brian Campion's going to offer the amendment from education, and we're all on board with that. I know, Brian, you had a question on the process.
Yeah, and actually, I've just received emails that indicate that S100 is going to be asked to be passed over today. We have apparently some folks that are getting real nervous about the impact on local school budget. So that, I just got that from one of the other senators. It says Senator Campion agrees this is a big issue and the bill will be passed over today.
Oh, shit. That's really bad. Yeah, I was talking with Brian earlier before you guys all got on, and
We're still on YouTube, by the way, Senator.
yeah, that's fine. I hope it's wired into every superintendent's office in the state. But, you know, we spend, if you think about it, $1,600 million bills on education. And we can't afford to take 25 of those and feed the kids. I mean, it's like having, if one of us had $1,600 in our pockets and we're at the grocery store quivering over whether we should spend $25 on food. I mean, it's ridiculous that that's even an issue in the system. And my own little district is getting over 10 million new dollars on top of that to spend on something in the next 3 or 4 years. I mean, the whole issue is baloney as far as I'm concerned. It's and I think it's time that we get a shot in the spine and stand up and take that crew on. Anytime they run short of money, they certainly know where to come and ask for more. And when we have 2 school budgets that didn't pass this last year at town meeting. So what they're doing is blowing smoke, and I don't think school board members or the superintendents have even read the bill. We've got, if it puts them over the spending limits, that's in there to protect them. I mean, we did a heck of a job putting a system together to make sure our children get fed properly without a, I mean, I don't know what they think, but anyways, Brian.
Yeah. So from what I'm gathering, it's one line in the bill that's creating most of the issue. And I think it's in Chris's part of the bill. And the line says, to the extent that costs are not reimbursed through federal or state funds or other sources, the cost of making available school lunches and breakfasts shall be borne by school districts. So that's where they're coming down and saying, if the state doesn't want to pony up the money and the feds don't want to pony up the money, it's going to fall on the local school districts to do that. And I think that's the one that's causing the most heartache.
Yeah, the other thing, so do we agree that we have about 280 schools, something like that? Isn't that what we've heard? And 70 of them. So we really have 210 schools left. And if you take
70 to 80, Chris.
Sure. But let's say there's 210 schools and they've got to come up with the $25 million and there's 210 of them. It's $120,000. I mean, it's so if you're a superintendent, maybe you got 4 or 5 of those. It's in 5 years after. I mean, it really, I think you're right, Mr. Chair, that somebody's sent out provocative emails.
Well, where it came? It came from the executive director of the 3 groups. Last week, we got that nasty letter saying that we were all messed up. Well, then that got sent to all the school districts, and of course the school districts, I doubt if they saw the bill, but they got that letter pushing them to push us. Well, tough luck as far as I'm concerned.
Well, and we're not oblivious to the pressure this means. We just haven't pinned it down exactly how we do it, but we've talked about helping them make the transition. We've talked about the federal dollars. We know the sales tax is performing well. So the ed fund, there's no reason to think this is a direct hit to property tax. There are a lot of variables here.
Well, and
anyway,
we aren't completely broke, and I would expect when the committee starts dealing with the 22 budget, that some of that cost will get picked up by us. But hell, we got to work through the system and work with the system. And I don't know, but I hope that we stick to our guns and move forward. Three committees voted the bill out unanimous, and that says quite a bit. So, anyways, so we're going to pass over that, I guess, today.
That's the word I got.
Yeah.
Can we talk about some other scheduling things? Just
yeah.
So maybe Linda could take us offline.
Okay, the little red light came on, so now I know we're on. So anyways, good to be back. And we have our draft person, legislative council person, Mike O'Grady, with us. Margaret Lagus is also with us. And we're going to take a run through of 434. That's an H bill. It's the Agricultural Innovation Board. And so I guess, Michael, we had Kerry in yesterday and one of his assistants, and they, gave us a little background of where they were coming from with this. And so it'd be good to hear, how you put it together and how it went, say, on the health side.
Okay. Would you like me to share my screen as I walk through this, or do you all have a copy in front of you that you can review?
Actually, every time somebody shares the screen, I freeze up. So I don't like it to do that. But
so we'll freeze Brian out. And
Well, maybe could Linda, does it do that when Linda does it?
Whenever
Brian?
anybody shares the screen, unless I turn off my video, I can't hear anything and I freeze up. And we do have it on the
Oh.
committee page.
okay, so
I
I will just walk through it as though you each are able to review the text, if that's okay.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
So those of you who were on the committee last year saw some of this language or a very close approximation to this language when you were reviewing S-272, an act relating to pesticide management. You may recall, members on the committee last year, you made changes to the Vermont Pesticide Advisory Council, including membership, how often they meet, and certain other kind of organizational changes to the Vermont Pesticide Advisory Council. While you were doing that, the agency came in with a proposal to kind of convert the Pesticide Advisory Council from its statutory kind of limited, I won't say limited, it's specific function, and to basically expand the powers of a board, create a new board, retain the pesticide management authority under that board, but to give that board additional authority to review some of the kind of innovative or interesting issues that were coming up at the agency where the agency didn't have a forum for review of those issues. So that is what the Agricultural Innovation Board is. H434 would replace the Vermont Pesticide Advisory Council with the Agricultural Innovation Board. And so in section 1, the first change is that the board is being moved out of the pesticide chapter and being placed in the water quality chapter in the subchapter on regenerative farming. And that subchapter would be renamed the Regenerative and Innovative Agriculture subchapter. And then there would be a new section that would be added to that subchapter, 6 VSA 4964, to establish the Agricultural Innovation Board. The board would be created to review and make recommendations for prioritizing and coordinating all the recommendations that you are going to receive from multiple working groups, such as the Soil Health Payment for Ecosystems Working Group, the Vermont Climate Council, and other relevant recommendations. The board would also recommend practices that reduce the use and exposure to pesticides and synthetic fertilizers in order to protect soil biology, human health, and environmental health. They would advise the governor and the executive branch and the General Assembly with respect to legislation concerning the use of pest control measures and integrated pest management. They would recommend to the Secretary of Agriculture rules or legislation for the regulation of treated articles. And this is some subdivision that I think can be consolidated. The language that is referred to on page 2 of the as-passed version is really just referring back to the standard for regulation of treated articles in 6 VSA 11, whatever 10. Does everyone know what a treated article is?
Is that something like Corey Parent?
I don't know. It's possible, but
You've stumped him.
Generally, a treated article is an item that has in its manufacturing been had a pesticide, fungicide, insecticide, etc., applied to it, and then that product, after its application, is marketed for use, either for that the application of the pesticide protects the product, or the application of the pesticide is going to have some control measure when it is in use. So the kind of vast array of
isn't most corn a treated article because it's all ready to go? with
Yes, yes. Some corn is, but the vast array of examples that I use is like a creosote treated telephone pole. That is a treated article.
Hmm.
Your silver biocide underwear that has odor fighting properties, that is a treated article. So there's a considerable breadth of products that are treated articles. US EPA does not consider a treated article a pesticide. They consider the manufacturing process where the actual pesticide is put into the article to be an application of pesticide, and they regulate that, but they don't regulate the sale and marketing and use of a treated article after its manufacturing. A few years ago, you gave the Agency of Agriculture, and I believe Senator Pearson, I think you were the reporter of that bill, the authority to regulate treated articles if there was a determination that that treated article had a potential environmental risk or risk to human health that was particularly hazardous or had a long-term deleterious effect. So what the agency proposed is that the Ag Innovation Board will take over the VPAC's authority about recommending what's hazardous or long-term deleterious. In the drafting, I could have made this simpler and consolidated, and that's basically all I'm saying.
Yeah, Michael, are we sticking with just ag products in this treated articles issue, or is it going to take in underwear or telephone poles and all those things?
The way that the law currently is in statute, it is not just agricultural products, but that is why you build into it that the agency only has the ability to regulate those products that are hazardous or have a long-term deleterious effect, because of the breadth of the products that are out there, and because you don't want them trying to register sneakers or paint or things that have applications that make it a treated article, but if they're not hazardous or deleterious, you don't want the agency to be regulating that.
No. Brian?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, and I understand that, Michael, but who decides whether they're hazardous?
Well, that's partly what the Vermont Pesticide Advisory Council does now. They review these products and make a determination of whether or not the state should regulate them. But in order for the state to regulate them, they either have to come to you as a body, or they would have to go through a rulemaking, which in part comes to you as a body as well. So there's basically checks and balances built into potential regulation of treated articles.
So that pesticide group, this is the first time I've heard about underwear and telephone poles. That group could have had jurisdiction over those articles as well.
They could have recommended to the Secretary of Agriculture to take action to regulate a treated article.
Wow.
We have talked about telephone poles with that are treated. I don't ever recall dealing with sneakers and underwear, but this new innovation board would also have that same authority to review and bring to
this Ag Innovation Board is going to assume VPAC's, the Pesticide Advisory Council's authorities and duties, but it's going to have expanded authority and duty, and it's going to have an expanded, or I should say, a revised membership that is not heavily focused on state regulatory agencies, the way that VPAC is heavily regulated in that way. And that's one of the things you looked at last year when you were looking at 272 about adding some additional interest into the VPAC board. This bill 434 does that, moves several of those state entities off the board, and brings in more farming interest and some other expertise onto the board. So let's talk about some of why they're bringing some extra expertise or different people onto the board. Because some of the additional authority of the Ag Innovation Board is they're going to recommend practices to reduce the use and generation of waste associated with agricultural plastics. They're going to try to incentivize farming practices that look to reduce the use and dependence on pesticides. They're going to advise the agency with regard to the regulation of biostimulants. And you all went through the biostimulant discussion in S102 about what it is. The board would also recommend studies necessary for the performance of its function, and it would explore developing standards for a Vermont agricultural marketing program that sets standards for carbon capture, plastic use, and organic product selection. So it assumes VPAC's authority, but it has additional authorities as well. And therefore, the board is changing. The Secretary of Ag convenes the board. The Secretary of Ag appoints the members to the board. There are 14 members on the board. The Secretary of Ag is one of them. Then there's a member of the organic farming community, a member from UVM Center for Sustainable Agriculture, the Agency of Agriculture's head of their agricultural chemical program, the Agency of Agriculture's water quality program head, the Commissioner of Health or designee, the Secretary of Natural Resources or designee, a soil biologist or certified crop consultant, a member of the public representing the dairy industry, a member of the public representing the fruit and vegetable production, a member of the public representing non-dairy livestock farming, a member of the public knowledgeable in agricultural water quality management, and a representative from an organization involved in land conservation, and then last, a representative from an environmental advocacy organization. So who is not on this board would be the Commissioner of Fish and Wildlife, the Commissioner of Forest, Parks and Recreation, the Agency of Transportation, all of whom were on or currently are on VPAC. And so that's one of the significant changes to the membership. You don't have those state entities that either apply or manage pest as part of their jurisdiction.
So are there any qualifications with the different organizations that they have to be knowledgeable of these things that they're going to be regulating?
No. And first, let me say that this board is not going to be the regulatory board. They are an advisory board. They advise the secretary and the governor and you regarding what should be regulated or legislated about. They don't have independent regulatory authority, but they make recommendations as to what should be regulated.
Yep. Brian and then Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also noticed, Michael, there's no mention of a dairy farmer. There's a member of the public, but that doesn't necessarily mean that person is a dairy farmer.
Right. It's a person that represents the industry, a member of the public representing the dairy industry. That could be it could be one of the co-op leadership. It could be a person who runs a yogurt plant. It could be someone like that, or it could be a dairy farmer.
And yet there's a member of the farming community who practices organic agriculture.
That is correct.
So to me, it doesn't necessarily even out. But
Well, in putting together the draft of this bill prior to its introduction, the agency worked with multiple interested groups. And when you work with multiple interested groups want to be represented in what is created. And so I think you see some of that in the membership of the board.
okay, thank you.
Senator Collmore, I guess as I read this, a member of the public representing the dairy industry in Vermont could be a processor, I guess.
Yeah.
Or a farmer, whereas in the organic, it's just a member of the farming community. So, I mean, you could make it a parallel pretty easily, but in the dairy, we have a big dairy industry. We have organic farmers, right? That maybe that I don't know, but maybe that's part of.
Well, we have a more open mind than the House has, so you know we can work on that, the board.
Michael, I was just curious at the top of page 5. It says a member of the public knowledgeable in agricultural water management. Did you mean is
It probably should be in knowledgeable in agricultural water quality requirements. It's probably a better terminology.
because there's a lot of ways that could look. So, all right, thanks.
Mike.
Yep.
Are you finished, Chris? Okay, Corey.
Michael, would this committee replace any other committees in the Agency of Ag and take over other jurisdiction? Is there other overlap that the House considered here?
The potential overlap is probably with the ecosystems incentives working group, but remember is only going to be in existence you just extended it another year until 2023, I believe. So that's really the existing overlap right now, but that overlap goes away in 2023. And that's within the agency. Now, there's potential overlap with the Climate Council because the Climate Council is going to be looking at agricultural management measures as part of a way to reduce the climate impact of the state. And so there's potential overlap there. Part of what this board would be doing would be recommending how to prioritize recommendations from an entity like the Climate Council that is outside of the agency.
Okay, Corey. Okay, Michael, I guess continue on. Anthony has a question.
Remind me, Michael, it's that all these people are appointed by the Secretary of Agriculture?
That's correct.
I mean, because it does seem heavily weighted towards the towards agriculture agency. I also wonder whether we shouldn't consider having someone, if we're talking about the impacts of pesticides and whatnot on food and land, it seems like there should be somebody who has experience in just many human health aspects of what's going on with the pesticides. Not saying it's not a question, it's just a thought.
If I could respond, that's a good point, because VPAC currently has a representative from the College of Medicine at UVM that is supposed to be knowledgeable in the effects of I'm just going to use the general term pesticide on human health. I think the problem with VPAC is I think the agency had trouble getting that person to actually come and participate.
Yeah, actually, I think I remember hearing about that.
Yeah.
They're having trouble with that. Also, Michael, what is it says a soil biologist or a certified crop consultants. I think of crop consultants as people who go to your farm and try to sell you chemicals and pesticides and stuff like that, genetically engineered products, you know. Am I correct in that thought?
I think that that's part of what a crop consultant might do. Crop consultants these days have significant skills and provide a broad array of services. They may recommend the use of certain fertilizers or pesticides or certain treated article crops, but that's not the only thing that they do. They might be there for nutrient management. They might be there for water quality. They might be there for rotation. There's a lot of things that a crop consultant could be doing.
And finally, if we're talking about essentially eliminating the Pesticide Advisory Council, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought that the Pesticide Advisory Council did stuff around permitting for use of chemicals on rights of way and that kind of stuff. And will that be happening? Who would be doing that work under this scenario?
So they technically don't issue the permit. They review the applications,
right,
and then recommend. That is not explicit really anywhere in statute that they do that. It's just something that they have been doing. It is intended that the Agricultural Innovation Board will be the entity that will do that in the future.
Okay. Thanks.
Is that written in there, Michael, that makes it explicit that they would do that?
What is written in is the authority in which the Pesticide Advisory Council does that under in Title VI is amended, so it is transferred to the Agricultural Innovation Board. It is one of the later sections where there's conforming amendments made, changing VPAC's authority to that the authority of the Agriculture Innovation Board.
Yeah. And, guys, as we move forward with this discussion this morning, jot your notes down so that when we do go through the bill, we'll have that information, and you'll have it to present. Okay, Michael.
Okay. So the members are appointed for 3-year terms, and they are only supposed to serve no more than 2 terms, except if they're ex officio, except if they're like a government employee that's being that's appointed to the board by nature of their office. They're going to get compensation and expenses, which VPAC currently does not receive. Well, I should say VPAC gets expenses, they don't get the per diems. So the House wanted to change that. The money would be paid out of the Pesticide Monitoring Revolving Fund. The agency has testified that there's available funding in that fund to pay for that, and the authority of that fund extends to duties involved by the agency in the regulation of pesticides, which this would involve. And then you get to the powers and duties of the board. They're going to issue a report annually to you that recommends policy solutions to assist farmers in reducing use of and exposure to pesticides and use of innovative or alternative practices. They're going to propose an annual budget for any of the ideas that they identify and recommend in their annual report. Then they're going to survey farmers for every county in the state to help better understand the current agricultural landscape, as well as current challenges for farmers in order to better inform recommendations.
What was the last thing again, Michael?
They're going to survey farmers throughout the state to help understand the challenges farmers are facing, so that they can better inform the recommendations to you and to the governor.
The board is going to do that, or?
Yep.
Yeah, well, I'll put a question mark by that one, but,
Okay.
go ahead.
So with that, you are finished with the section that creates the Agricultural Innovation Board. You move on to section 2, which is the repeal of the Pesticide Advisory Council. That repeal would occur on January 1, 2022. Then you come to section 3, and this is the beginning of the conforming amendments. And the first conforming amendment is to the Mosquito Control Authority. Currently, VPAC recommends the acceptable products and methods for use of mosquito control applications. And so section 3, 6 BSA 1083A5 would transfer that authority from VPAC to the Agricultural Innovation Board. Similarly, in section 4, this is 6 BSA 1103. This is the Secretary of Agriculture's general authority to regulate the control and use of pesticides in the state. And currently, the VPAC is supposed to provide advice to the Secretary, and the Secretary is supposed to act upon that advice in the regulation and control of pesticides in the state. That authority to provide advice to the Secretary would transfer from VPAC to the Agricultural Innovation Board. Again, a similar change is made in section 5, 6 BSA 1104. This is the specific powers of the Secretary to regulate pesticides. The first change was VPAC recommends to the Secretary those records that pesticide applicators, sellers, dealers, etc., need to keep for purposes of regulation and management of pesticides in the state. So that authority of recommending what records to retain or maintain is shifted from VPAC to the Agricultural Innovation Board. Also in that same section, the Secretary has authority to adopt rules for the control of pesticides in the state. And he is supposed to do that with the advice of currently VPAC. That requirement about the advice would shift from the Pesticide Advisory Council to the Agricultural Innovation Board. Again, similar change, conforming change, section 6 BSA 1105A. This is the section where the agency is given authority to regulate treated articles. The Secretary of Ag is only supposed to adopt a rule regarding treated articles upon the recommendation of VPAC. And so that recommendation would be shifted from VPAC to the Agricultural Innovation Board. And again, the standard for if a treated article should be regulated or recommended for regulation is that the Agricultural Innovation Board has determined that the article will have a hazardous or long-term deleterious effect on the environment, presents a likely risk to human health, or is dangerous. So your sneaker, unless it's somehow dangerous, is not going to be subject to regulation. It has to be something that meets that standard. And this has been in law for about, I think, 4 years now, and they have not yet regulated a treated article or even recommended, to my knowledge, regulation of a treated article. And then you come to section 7, which is an implementation transition section. This just provides that the Secretary of Agriculture shall appoint the new members to the Agricultural Innovation Board by January 1, 2022. And that is important because that is when VPAC is repealed. And so it's intended that there will be no gap in regulatory authority or functioning for the regulation of pesticides. It will shift from VPAC to the Ag Innovation Board on January 1, 2022. And that's the bill.
Michael, why are all the different sections dealing with just moving a particular item from VPAC to the board, VPAC to the board? Why aren't those all looped together and under one section?
I
Is
could have
there
done
a
that.
reason?
I could have done that, and I could have done it really easily, but it doesn't show what is actually being changed, right? I could have just said legislative council and its statutory revision authority shall change the term Vermont Pesticide Advisory Council, the Ag Innovation Board, where it appears on the following statutes, and you wouldn't have seen what was really the subject matter of those changes. It would have reduced the bill by about 4 pages, but you wouldn't have actually seen what was being changed.
Yeah. Well, this is, it's not a major change, but everybody should at least be able to see what it's doing and read that. And so I guess it's good that you did it the way you did it. Brian?
Thank you, Bobby. So Michael, if we can go back, if you can scroll back to page 7, line 7, and this is sort of an English question, I think. In the performance of such duties, the secretary shall act upon the advice of the Agricultural Innovation Board and subject to the approval. Does that imply that the board is telling the secretary what to do?
So that is not how the agency interprets that language. I've had discussions about that in the past, about whether or not the secretary needs to have the advice of the VPAC in order to go forward. They don't believe that that's the case, but in practice, that's what they have done. So it can definitely be read to that mean that it's not read by the agency in that way, but it is actually implemented in that way. I will note that in the treated articles section, where it says that the secretary may adopt rule upon the recommendation of currently VPAC, it was your intent, and it was drafted that way, that the secretary cannot adopt a rule unless there is a recommendation from VPAC or, under this bill, the Ag Innovation Board, because you wanted the experts to be making that determination if there's harmful, dangerous, deleterious, etc., before the secretary went forward. You didn't want it to be a political decision. You wanted it to be a scientific decision.
But we've since, if this goes through, changed the complexion of the board, in some view, rather substantially. So I guess I'm just questioning whether we want, in essence, and I don't know if it's a citizen board, but, other people to make rules and regulations and not the Secretary of Agriculture. That's all.
Well, technically, the board won't be making the regulation. The board will be making the recommendation for the regulation.
Okay.
And so the secretary still would be the one that would issue the rule, but would have to be upon the recommendation of the board.
Okay, so.
But I understand your point, Senator Collmore. It's a valid point.
Okay, thank you. I'll mark it down.
Other questions at this time from Michael? Margaret, would you like to tell us what you think about 434?
I would. For the record, I'm Margaret Lagus, and on this issue, I'm going to kind of tag team 2 clients. I represent the Biotechnology Innovation Organization, and I also represent Agrimark, the dairy cooperative. Both of those groups support the idea of setting up an agricultural innovation board, predominantly because this is a more holistic, one-stop shopping way of looking at the rapid, unbelievable changes that are taking place, not only in American agriculture, but more specifically on Vermont farms over the last 5 to 8 years. You heard from Agrimark farmers about how rapidly they're adopting some of the research that UVM is doing, that Vermont is literally leading the way on many kinds of innovation on our farms, and that Vermont farmers are enthusiastically embracing some of those changes and really trying hard to adopt some of this novel way to look at farming. There have been some very rapid changes, and Vermont farmers are doing a lot of precision agriculture, a lot more field scouting, a lot more using GPS and satellite technology to help them both reduce their inputs, but also better create more healthier and more abundant crops on the fields that they have. There's just so much research going on. It's kind of hard to keep up with all of it. And we think that a board like this has a better way to kind of grapple with all of that, and to have a variety of farming types on the board is also really helpful, because sometimes one pesticide may look like it's really not that necessary if you're a dairy farmer, but if you're a fruit and vegetable farmer, it could be kind of life or death for some specific virus or fungus that you have that just doesn't affect dairy farming. So to have kind of a broader perspective on the producers, we think is really important. We also just want to emphasize that this board is going to continually look at ways to help farmers reduce their inputs. All of these products are really expensive on farms and for farmers to buy. And so we want to use them as efficiently as we can. Obviously, that only benefits the environment. It benefits our back pocket. And that's where some of these crop consultants come in, because they come into our farms. They do a lot of the scouting for us. We don't have time sometimes to be out in all of our fields and figure out where things are. They know a lot about just exactly how much pest pressure is actually going to affect our yield, versus just us walking out and seeing a bunch of bugs and being like, oh, I better spray over there. They'll know that unless you have a certain number of those bugs within a certain area, then spraying is not only not economical, but we can save you money, because it's not going to really affect your overall production in that field. And that's really what we care about. We want a healthy crop, and we don't want to put products on it that we don't need. And we think that this board is going to be able to better look at all of those issues all together. We also appreciate that it's going to meet 4 times a year. It's going to be required to come out with an annual report with recommendations. They're going to reach out to farmers. You kind of wondered about that survey. It is hard to get answers from farmers sometimes, but I do think that right now, dairy farming in Vermont, and probably many other kinds of farming, is kind of like farming from a fire hose, because so many changes are taking place that maybe a survey would be helpful, and just be like, how many more innovations can you possibly add on to your daily chore list? And so I do think that reaching out to farmers and finding out, are you kind of at the maximum of what you can take right now? Or, how are all of these changes feeling to you, and how are they working on your farms? So we think that with all of the efficiencies that are going on out there, that having a kind of one-stop shopping, one board that's going to look at all of these various different issues and look at them in a really holistic way as to all of the inputs and all of the outcomes of those inputs being used in Vermont, along with all the different practices that farmers are using, is really an important change. One of the things we would say is, Senator Parent asked a minute ago about whether there are any boards or commissions that might not be necessary anymore. A couple of years ago, you set up a seed trait committee to look at new GMO seeds coming into Vermont, and potentially some of the pesticides that get used on them. That board was set up. It was mostly the people that would be either selling the products or competitors of those selling the products. I think this board is a much better place to look at those issues, because they'll be looking at it in a holistic way. Is that GMO seed trait going to be something that's really important for Vermont farmers? Or is the additional use of that particular pesticide really something that isn't necessary for us, or doesn't necessarily improve the overall outcome of agronomy in Vermont? And that's something that I think UVM looks at all the time, as to whether or not some of these treated articles are important for many kinds of water quality issues. They're vital. We really can't do it without them. But maybe there are some that are unnecessary. And so we think that this innovation board, kind of looking at it in the whole, is a much better way of handling those issues.
So that sounds like your crew then is supporting this. I know we've taken quite a lot of testimony, or heard different testimony, and even like the spreading of manure, how lime and fertilizer, how they're all run off a satellite,
Yeah.
and the equipment's all set up to add more, take some, do less. It's amazing what is happening out there on the farm and farmland. Are there questions from the committee to Margaret?
Well, I'll just tell you one more quick little thing, and that is that my daughter works for a company that handles large endowments and investments. And if you want to think about how rapidly some of these changes are coming, they're actually doing a podcast on precision agriculture, because there's so much money right now being spent on the technology used in farming, because the sellers like Nestle and Procter and Gamble and other companies that buy food have customers that want changes and want farmers to do things in certain ways. So there was a ton of money coming in to do the research and innovation on precision agriculture and inputs in general. So things are, if we think things have been changing rapidly in the last 10 years, wait for the next 5 years, because there's a lot of money coming in, not only in buying up farmland because they are worried that we won't have farmland anymore. There's too much housing pressure. It's scary and hopeful.
Yeah. Well, I think it was last night on the news, they showed a tomato grower down in Kentucky with everything growing under glass. And I mean, not a spoonful of dirt in the building, and the tomatoes were rolling out of there wide open, as fast as they could pack them.
Amazing.
No. So are there any other questions from the committee members for Michael? What I would expect and hope is we probably will put this bill, on notice so that we will keep working on it. In the next couple of weeks, hopefully we can, get this done up and moved out back to the house or whatever we decide to do with it. We have Julie Moore is coming to talk to us in regards to this. But she can't make it until 11:30. So I don't know if there are any other questions if there aren't any others for Michael or for Margaret, or if you'd like to have Michael look anything up or do anything for us in the meantime. Be a good time to ask. Chris?
Just, Michael, a question on the bill. I want you to check my memory. The Pesticide Advisory Board, in theory, had, it was sort of advisory, but it was sort of regulatory. But Kerry, I recall, testified that basically he was the regulator, and if to the extent there was a regulatory function in the current setup, it was carried out by him. Because I'm, I happen to like Kerry, and he's a good person, but he's a person and in a position, and the position, I'm always leery when we assign comfort to the current holder of the position. So can you just help me understand that? Because it does sound like a pretty significant change, even though it's not actually changed to the current practice. Can you help me sort that out?
So I would agree. Well, let me back up. the regulator is not Carrie. The regulator is the agency, and more broadly, the state. The regulatory authority is more than just the rules. It's inspection, enforcement, etc. And all of that authority is invested with the agency. The agency is the one that has the authority to inspect. The agency is the one that registers. The agency is the one that does the labeling requirements. The agency is the regulator. The Pesticide Advisory Council is intended to provide the input and expertise of those persons that use or have knowledge of pest control measures. And when it was initially enacted, it's so heavily state government employee represented because its initial function was to recommend how pesticides would be used by the state, like by AOT or by Forest and Parks. But it has expanded beyond that, and logically so, because pesticides are really ubiquitous. You don't realize how present they are in your life. You know, when you go wash your hands, you are likely not washing your hands with soap. You are likely washing your hands with a product that has a pesticide registration number, because of what it is it claims to do. And so it's something that it makes sense to have a board advise the regulator on what to do. And as Margaret just testified, that there is so much that is happening, both with pest control and with farming in general, that the agency needs a forum. And the concept is that, well, maybe this new forum can do both the pest control advisory function and the innovative agricultural function.
Thank you. So, but it's not, so that all makes a lot of sense. Is there a shift in power that is being considered here from a board that today could say, no, we don't want this? They don't do that, but they could say, no, we don't want this. And then the agency through carries that out. That's part of what I'd like to understand. I agree with everything you've described, but is there a fundamental shift that we're making? And it's not to say we should or shouldn't, but I want to make sure I understand it.
I don't think you are making a fundamental shift. I expect there are interested parties that, or maybe even members of BPAC, that think that what they say goes, right? That if they advise the secretary that certain records need to be maintained, that will happen. But that is not, and that may have been the practice, but that is not the law. You know, it just says that the BPAC advises the secretary on what records need to be retained or maintained. It doesn't say BPAC sets the standards that the secretary shall require. That's different. That's a different standard. The one place where I think BPAC has that kind of on-off authority is for treated articles, and that was your intent. That was the legislature's intent. And so otherwise, I think they are advisory in nature. They may not think so. That's their prerogative, but I don't believe that is the law.
Thank you. I appreciate the time.
Any other questions for Michael? I was talking last evening, I was chatting with my brother who lives in Florida. And, we were just talking in general about different things. He said, well, tomorrow I've got to kind of be around because the pest control people are coming to spray my lawn. And I said, well, yeah. Oh, yeah. He said, yeah, we contract out with this outfit, and they come in and every month they come and do something with lawns and put stuff on them or no stuff, depending on, I guess, how they test out. But our I think our people are getting more and more into that right here in Vermont in the summer, having lawn care people come and check and do certain things to their lawn. And so this new board would certainly look after that, I'd presume. I know we talked about stuff like that in the past.
So those companies, and they are definitely in Vermont already, and they've even kind of evolved. Now there's natural ones, but they need to be licensed applicators in order to apply the pesticide, and all of their products need to be registered with the state, and they may only use products for their intended use according to the label on the product.
Do they have to do any type of testing like we do on farms, like for nutrient management? They must test those lawns and things to see what they're lacking.
I don't know of any statutory requirement for them to test. I could look at the pesticide regulations. I don't know. I would have to look at that. In addition, the label might have provisions that would effectively require them to test, only used in certain soil conditions, etc.
Yeah.
But that's not going to be on every product.
No.
So I would have to look at the agency's rules to see if they have a testing requirement. But I don't want to say what my intuition is, because I just don't know.
Not that we have time to do this, but sometime it would be good just to see, have Carrie bring us over. They must have to stores, home goods stores and like Home Depots and Lowe's, and they must have to keep track of how much fertilizer they sell. And it'd be interesting to see how many tons people go to those kind of places and buy versus tons that go to like Bordeaux's and Laws and the more agricultural places, to see what the, just to see what the comparison is in tons sold for private use versus for farm use. But anyway, any other questions for Michael? If not, thanks a lot, Michael, and we'll try to get you back on the schedule sometime, maybe early next week, to work on this bill and hopefully a couple of others.
Okay. Is the committee doing S102 on the floor today?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll be watching, and I can, if questions can come up, I will Well, I don't know what your protocol is about having access to electronics, but I will email responses or if there are any questions or information regarding questions.
You know, I was going to ask about that too. Obviously, when we're in the room, we can ask for recess, and the lawyers are behind us, and you can quickly ask a question. Nobody's done that on any bill yet this year that I can remember. And if they do ask for a recess, I think we're still on YouTube. So it's sort of like, how do you ask the question if you're not in the room?
Chris?
Well, you can, last year when we were doing some of the harder stuff, Michael was emailing me answers as they were surfacing, but you could always call, ask for a recess, turn off your camera and call, or ask that one of the ledge council call you, right, Michael? I mean, we do have, if we can manage it ourselves, we do have access to, there's no prohibition to using electronics in the remote world.
Well, I don't know. It's just like being in the Senate room. You shouldn't be.
I've been enjoying my water.
Electronics. We should holler at each other. Go out the door and holler at each other. No, if you need to ask Michael something, do you have two units at home? So,
yes.
And Michael will be listening, and if he thinks you need help, just watch on your screen and he'll plug it in, I'm sure.
Yep. And I usually CC another member of the committee just in case, because reporters sometimes just don't have the time or don't get that attention on their screen. So another member of the committee can chime in if helpful.
There is usually about a minute lag though, so be aware of that from our discussion to the YouTube, which Michael.
I presume that Senator Bray is going to offer his amendment. It's not in the calendar though, so I guess he's going to share it somehow, describe it or share it with the Senate.
So I am supposed to be in Senate Natural right now to review their final amendment.
Yeah, that's fine, Michael. Thanks a lot for your time this morning. And they accepted our response to their amendment and going to add that in. We should be all set on that. The 102. I ran through some emails on my other iPad here. I see where the League of Cities and Towns come out against our bill, and they're worried. Of course, those towns they wouldn't be able to get their school budget, wouldn't be able to get their town budget passed if the schools took all their money. And like they aren't going to get any of this federal money.
Well, they are getting towns are getting some, I think, but
300 million's going back to the towns.
It sounds like we are delaying. I believe. Well, Brian told us that. Sounds like maybe you and Jane should connect, Bobby, and see what we can offer to people to calm them down. Other than your stirring rhetoric, which will also help get them oriented about the $1,600 bills in their pocket.
1,600 billion.
Worrying about spending $25. I mean, after all, it's going to be the end of the world. I found
maybe you should make it 160 bucks and Collimore's just asking
25 cents.
He just wants a quarter.
Oh,
you can't spare a quarter for these kids?
Yeah. I mean, if you put it in perspective so people can really understand it, it's bull, it's total bull. And And you have to do that sometimes because what the 1.6 billion, well, it's only a 1 and it's 0.6. That isn't very much. But you break it down to get it in real dollars that people can understand. Oh my God, that's what the difference is. and but anyways, yeah, I'll have a chat with Jane. The other thing, Ag's going to be doing their 22 budget, and I thought we would probably have them in some morning to run through that for us as a committee. And also tomorrow at noontime, we've got that joint meeting with natural resources and with appropriations from the Lake Champlain crew. Usually they just come and talk to us in natural resources, but I guess they want to present to Props as well. So they set it up for noon tomorrow. So we'll have to watch for that.
And there's also a joint session at 10:30 tomorrow, isn't there?
Yes. And we're going to do the raw milk bill, the first thing for a little bit in the morning. And we'll have some witnesses in on that. And then we go to the retention joint meeting with the House on the retention thing. And then we'll have probably a little break. I would hope a little break in between that and the noontime thing with Lake Champlain Advisory Committee. So why don't we take 20 minutes or so and then come back about 25 after to hear Julie's presentation on the Innovation Board.
Okay.